ABC News. This week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts.
Our nation readies for action. The Secretary of Defense returns home from Asia after laying the groundwork for military activity. And in Washington, the president remains resolute.
Full warning has been given, and time is running out.
We'll bring you the latest from our correspondents around the world.
Plus, warnings of renewed attacks on Americans. How real is the threat? We'll ask two men who've been briefed, Senate Intelligence Committee members Bob Graham and Richard Shelby.
Also this week, the economic aftershocks. Is the worst yet to come? We'll speak with the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Glenn Hubbard.
That's This Week, featuring George Will and George Stephanopoulos. And joining the roundtable, ABC's Claire Shipman. Now from Washington, Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts.
Welcome to the program. Today, the pieces are falling into place for military action, which appears to be imminent. Sam?
Cokie, it's clear that U.S. forces have been moving into place around the world. Air Force transports have flown to Uzbekistan on the northern border of Afghanistan, for instance. But if there is an operation about to begin, it's likely to be centered around the humanitarian food drop to the Afghan people promised by President Bush. Let's get the latest on all this from our correspondents here and overseas, beginning with our national security correspondent, John McWethy at the Pentagon. John?
Sam, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld traveled to the region last week. He was reassuring some nervous allies. And now that he is back in the United States, all indications are that the talking is finally over. U.S. and British forces are in position throughout the region. There has been some special operations surveillance teams inside Afghanistan trying to sharpen U.S. intelligence. But frankly, Sam, the opening act here is likely to be, as you have said, a combination of food drops to deal with the humanitarian situation on the ground, and probably also some bombing directed at the Taliban government there and Osama bin Laden and his associates. It is that combination, the thrust of that is likely to be so different than any other opening military action that the United States has conducted in its history. And for more on what the humanitarian side of this is likely to be, we turn to John Cochran, who is at a military base in Europe, the location of which must be undisclosed for security reasons. John?
That's right, Jack, undisclosed for security reasons, because just a few miles from where I'm standing, preparations are intense for the first airdrop of food supplies into Afghanistan. Now, this food will be very basic. Minerals and vitamins have been added, but it's meant to just sustain human life. It will have no animal parts, which means that Muslims will be able to eat it without violating their dietary laws. American officials know that when you make airdrops, some of this food is going to fall into the hands of the Taliban, but they say they have no choice. American officials also emphasize that this is just the first installment on a $320 million aid package to Afghanistan. And now to northern Afghanistan and my colleague, David Wright.
Thanks, John. There seems to be good reason for those security precautions. The Taliban oppose any airdrop of emergency supplies. They claim that the overland routes are safe and that if the U.S. really wanted to help the Afghan people, they would drive the food in, and the food that way could be distributed a bit more effectively. Well, the U.S. is unlikely to go that route, if only because it may be, if they did, that the food would end up serving the Taliban military and not the hungry people of Afghanistan. The Taliban claim to have moved some 8,000 soldiers into position along the border with Uzbekistan. They claim that it's a question of honor to defend that border because they have vowed to fight to the last against anyone who helps the United States in its cause. There's no way to independently verify the numbers, though, and it's doubtful that the Taliban have 8,000 soldiers to spare. The soldiers of the Northern Alliance are also gearing up for the expected battle. We've seen a good many soldiers moving through this city on their way to the front, and they've been given new supplies from the Russian military, including some former Soviet attack helicopters. Last night, Taliban radio broadcast a series of anti-American songs. No music, though. The Taliban have banned music. Let's turn now to ABC's Dan Harris in Islamabad.
David, thank you. Here in Islamabad, the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan has repeated an offer to the United States. Here's the offer: Taliban will detain Osama bin Laden and put him on trial in Afghanistan under Islamic law. This offer appears to be rather insufficient given the non-negotiable demands from the Bush administration. Those demands are to hand over Osama bin Laden and anyone else associated with terrorism, to close down the suspected terror camps, the training camps around Afghanistan, and to hand over the 8 foreign aid workers, 2 of whom are American, who are currently on trial in Afghanistan accused of spreading Christianity in that country. The other big news item out of Pakistan this morning is that this morning leaders here placed under indefinite house arrest a militant Islamic Party leader, one of the men who's been organizing the pro-Taliban, pro-Osama bin Laden street rallies that have been shown so often on television. This may be an attempt to clamp down on fundamentalist Muslims in advance of any U.S. military action. The leader of these protests says the protests will continue in his absence. Now we go to the White House and ABC News correspondent Terry Moran.
Thanks, Dan. Well, first things first, the administration's response to any offer from the Taliban is clear: no deal. The White House quickly rejecting this latest effort by the Taliban, and the president himself now sending the strongest signals that he has sent so far that action is imminent. Since September 11th, the president has vowed to go after the terrorists and the regimes which harbor them, but he's never put a time frame on that until now. In his radio address, the president clearly saying that the Taliban regime has been given full warning and time is running out. In fact, if you look at the totality of that radio address, it prefigures the kind of campaign that we just heard John McWethy talking about. He condemned the Taliban regime, outlining what he described as their repressiveness, and yet reached out to the Afghanistani people, pledging that the U.S. would provide humanitarian assistance. On the public schedule today, the president is in Emmitsburg, Maryland, for an annual ceremony honoring firefighters who died in the line of work. This year's ceremony, of course, particularly important and poignant, given the more than 300 firefighters in New York City who lost their lives at the World Trade Center. And now we're going to go for more on the investigation to ABC News' John Miller.
Well, Terry, investigators this week believe they can now tie one suspect from this plot to all 3 plots: the bombing of the embassies in East Africa, the attack on the USS Cole, and, of course, the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. They also believe that they can tie about $100,000 received by the hijackers' ringleader to a bin Laden finance lieutenant in the United Arab Emirates. They say that apparently the ringleader sent back the change before he committed suicide, about $10,000. All this week, FBI Director Bob Mueller has said more than once that the FBI has no specific, credible threat that they are aware of on an attack planned in the United States. Yet Attorney General John Ashcroft and, of course, Senator Richard Shelby from the Intelligence Committee that we're going to hear from have both said in Ashcroft's case that they believe there may be more attacks planned here and other terrorists in the United States, and in Shelby's case that he believes attacks on U.S. soil are imminent. Of course, at this point, one key question for investigators: are those attacks that they believe may be imminent timed for what we are going to do, meaning the United States military action, as their kickoff time? So right now, as many questions, perhaps more than answers. Sam?
Thank you, John, and all our other correspondents. Joining us now from Newport News, Virginia, is our ABC News military consultant, retired Air Force General Richard Hawley. General Hawley, welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
Well, of course, we understand that you're not going to reveal any operational detail that might help the enemy, even if you knew it. But in a general sense, if we're going to drop food in Afghanistan, how will that work?
Well, we'll have to consider what kind of defenses we're facing, and so given that we haven't suppressed anything there, we'll have to fly at pretty high altitudes. And of course, that'll reduce the effectiveness of the airdrops, because it's very hard to control where the food goes when you're dropping from altitudes as high as we'll need to fly in order to stay out of the range of the anti-aircraft artillery that the Taliban government has.
Well, they have some artillery,
it's also
some
tough
missiles
to find where to drop it because the people in Afghanistan are spread so widely. So this is going to be a challenging exercise for the Air Force.
Pardon me for interrupting you, but they do have some artillery missiles supplied by the Soviets, I understand. They're not the latest art, and yet they still could be dangerous. In Iraq, when a missile locks on, a radar locks on one of our planes, we try to suppress it, meaning fire at that battery. Do you imagine that's what would happen in Afghanistan? You wouldn't wait until a missile is actually fired?
that would be the preferred way to do it, is have an escort, fighter escort for the airdrop that can engage any anti-aircraft artillery on the ground that has a radar. The problem is many of these pieces are not radar guided, and so it's very difficult to find them in advance. You've also got some precautions you can take on the airdrop aircraft themselves against some of the defenses, some of the heat-seeking missiles and so on. But probably the most dangerous threat are the non-radar guided, the visually aimed anti-aircraft artillery, which is just tough to suppress in advance.
General Hawley, if the president decides to include bombing of Taliban bases or munitions, what sort of installations would we probably try to hit?
Well, I suspect we'd probably want to go after the instruments of coercion that the Taliban have at their disposal. Those artillery, armor, those kind of heavier military instruments that they've used in order to take control of the country and suppress the resistance that's in the country to their rule. Those are the obvious targets. They're the easiest ones to find. But even those are very difficult. You really need some eyes on the ground in order to pin the locations of those things down so you can do a good job against them.
Let's turn now to the hunt for Osama bin Laden. We don't know, you and I, whether in fact he has been pinpointed yet, but he's believed still to be in southern Afghanistan, perhaps in a series of caves. Someone has suggested that perhaps we would use cruise missiles at caves simply to keep him running, even if we didn't know exactly where he was, to keep him off balance. Is that a possibility?
Well, it's certainly one approach. The idea of getting him moving is clearly what we would like to do, because it's much easier to find him if he's on the move than if he can just hunker down and stay put. This is not unlike a lot of people who go out and hunt deer. You know, you get him moving and then you can set up a screen to intercept him and locate him and then either capture or kill him in that manner.
General Hawley, thank you very much for joining us. Our ABC News military consultant, General Richard Hawley, joining us from Newport News, Virginia. Still ahead, the economic problems confronting the country. But first, when we come back, renewed threats against Americans. How real are they? We'll speak with Senators Bob Graham and Richard Shelby of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate right after this.
This Week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts. Brought to you by GE. From power generation to medical systems, we bring good things to life.
Joining us now, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Bob Graham of Florida. He joins us from Boston. Senator Graham, welcome.
Good morning.
And Senator Richard Shelby, the highest-ranking Republican on that committee, joins us from New York. Hello. Senator Shelby, you heard John Miller earlier talking about your comments at the end of last week about a future attack seems on the United States appears to be imminent, and you've said you can just about bet on it. Do you have any sense of when, how, where?
I don't know when, or where, or how, but you can just about believe that there are going to be, Cokie, more attacks. I wish there would never be an attack, but to lull the American people to sleep after what happened on September 11th would be a terrible, terrible thing to do. And will it be 100% that sure that there are going to be attacks? I'm not sure about that, but I believe there will be more attempts, more attacks, and what we want to do is prevent them if we can. But at least now the American people are on alert, and that's good.
Do you think that people have been lulling them, that people in this administration have been lulling the American people?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I think John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, when he spoke on this issue, he was telling the American people to be on the alert, to be watching out, because if we thought for 1 second that there are not going to be more terrorist attacks or more attempts at terrorist attacks, would be nonsense.
Senator Graham, you have said that you think the attacks will not be of the same nature as the ones that happened on September 11th. And you've said, and I'm quoting here, that they could be chemical, biological, or even nuclear. We're hearing some reports of nuclear suitcase bombs missing from the Russian arsenal. Are you hearing those reports, and is that part of your question?
My question is on the how and the when, Koki.
I'm hearing this guy and Graham, both.
Koki,
Senator Shelby seems to be having an audio problem, but go ahead, Senator Graham.
Koki, I believe that we could expect the next shoes to drop to be something different than hijacking airplanes. And the reason is because what the terrorists are trying to do is to create a pervasive sense of fear among the American people. The way to do that is to attack us in as many different forms as possible. And yes, unfortunately, these weapons of mass destruction are one of the ways in which we might expect and therefore need to be raising our defenses against. As to the when, I believe that once we do start direct military engagement in Afghanistan, the threat level is likely to go up because there will be a tendency for the terrorists to want to cause us to step back from our military operations by launching additional terror inside the United States.
Well, you've heard on the broadcast already that the food drops are likely to start today and perhaps some bombing. So from what you've said now and what Senator Shelby has said earlier, that sounds like it means that you're going to get this counter strike soon.
Yes, and it also goes to the fundamental issue, Koki. This is not a war that we can win by playing on the defensive. There are so many vulnerabilities in a free and open society such as the United States that we cannot reasonably maintain what is essentially America and try to protect every possible source of terrorist attack. Therefore, we've got to go on the offensive. We have got to eliminate these pools of terrorism around the world, and the place to start is with the terrorist who has already indicated his greatest enmity towards the United States, bin Laden.
Now, Senator Shelby, there have been reports over the weekend that we have actually held off on bombing in Afghanistan until the FBI could get to one of these cells that was prepared to do a counter-strike in this country. Is that, first of all, have you seen those reports?
Koki, I couldn't comment on that, but I can tell you we're going to do our strikes at the right moment. I believe it's going to be soon, but I don't know exactly when it's going to be, but there will be a response to September the 11th.
But do you feel, both of you, confident that we know who these other terrorists in this country are, and that we have gotten to all of the people who were prepared to attack on September 11th?
Oh, I don't believe we've gotten to everybody. I think the FBI is very much aware of a lot of groups in this country without going into details. But I believe to assume that we know where everybody is that could mount an attack in this country, that we're not there yet.
But
Koki, this really goes to one of the issues that Congress is going to be considering in the next few days, and that is the openness of information sharing between law enforcement and our intelligence agencies. Today, it is prohibited during the course of a criminal investigation, if you find out information about the intentions of a foreign agent, to give that information to the appropriate intelligence agencies. This has put handcuffs on our ability to know as fully as we need to know about these cells within the United States that have a foreign origin. I hope Congress is going to change that law and unleash our full investigative capabilities, both foreign and domestic, to find out about these cells.
But we're getting reports that there might have been a couple of other attacks prepared for September 11th. Do you feel we've gotten even to those people?
I can't fully comment on that question, but let me say there is ample unclassified evidence to the effect that the events of September the 11th, which probably actually started on September 9th with the assassination of the head of the Northern Afghanistan Alliance, were to be part of a series of events inside the United States and elsewhere, and that there is no all-clear signal yet to be issued that we have passed the time of potential threat for some of those future shoes to fall.
Senator Shelby, Senator Graham said it's important to start with getting at Osama bin Laden. Do we know where he is?
Well, we don't know exactly where he is at the moment, but I would think that we're close on his heels. But we have to remember, Koki, if we get Osama bin Laden, that's not the end of terrorism. That is just the beginning of the war against terrorism. It's a big first step. And we're soon going to be moving in that direction.
And Secretary Rumsfeld indicated last week that while we didn't have the coordinates of where bin Laden was, that we were getting closer and closer to knowing where he was. And I believe taking out bin Laden is a very significant step. He has organizational ability, charismatic qualities, and personal financial wealth, which makes him an unusually
does taking him out mean killing him?
It means eliminating him from his ability to conduct terrorism against the United States and other places in the world, and that may mean capture, but it probably means death.
You've both said that that's just the beginning. Are you saying that after bin Laden we start to go after other terrorist organizations,
Koki,
Hezbollah, Hamas, other organizations?
I believe we should not have any boundaries on rooting out terrorist groups wherever they are in the world. If we don't root them out, we're just going to be waiting here for the next strike, because it will certainly come.
The president defined the enemy as being global terrorists, those terrorist organizations which have the capability to work across many nations, particularly to attack the United States. I suspect that the next ring beyond bin Laden will be those terrorist groups where we have evidence that they had been part of the September 11th events.
And does that include Iraq?
I can't comment as to who those next ring are, but we know who they are, and they are on, I suspect, the next target list.
Koki, a terrorist group is a terrorist group, and we have to recognize that. I believe the president has stated that very clearly.
Senators, you've both been very critical of the intelligence failure that happened, that caused September 11th. And the House of Representatives this week added 9% to the budget for the intelligence community. But your committee, just a few weeks before September 9th, cut the intelligence budget by tens of millions of dollars.
No, that was not correct. In fact, we substantially added to the intelligence budget, and we did it on a 5-year basis, prioritizing 4 areas of particular weakness in the current intelligence community, particularly our human intelligence, our spies, and our ability to analyze the large volume of material that we collected. We're going to have to significantly increase the capabilities of our intelligence community and their ability to work with law enforcement within the United States if we are to accomplish our objective of cleaning out the swamp of terrorists on a global basis, at the same time giving the American people the maximum degree of protection against their future evil intentions.
Senator Shelby, we're out of time, but
Senator Graham's right on.
Is Governor Ridge going to be able to do that? Is Governor Ridge going to be able to do that kind of coordinating that Senator Graham just talked about?
He's got a lot of ability, and he's got the voice of the president and the hand of the president, but he's got to have a lot of power and a lot of authority. I believe he's going to have statutory authority.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Shelby, Senator Graham. Still ahead, the roundtable. But first, when we come back, just how bad will the economy become? The chairman of President Bush's Council of Economic Advisors joins us after this.
With the Labor Department announcing on Friday that American businesses cut more jobs in September than any month in the last decade, President Bush went to the Rose Garden and said Congress had to do something about it.
In order to stimulate the economy, Congress doesn't need to spend any more money. What they need to do is to cut taxes.
By the president's side that afternoon was the chairman of his Council on Economic Advisors, Glenn Hubbard, and he joins us now. Mr. Hubbard, welcome.
Good morning.
Those job numbers, 199,000 jobs lost in September, didn't even include the wave of layoffs post-September 11th. How much worse is the economy going to get?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the third quarter that just ended will be very adversely affected by the events of September 11th. The fourth quarter also. So I think we're still in for some rough patch for the rest of this year.
So does that mean a recession?
I think it's too early to tell. It's certainly true that the third and fourth quarter will be very, very badly affected. Whether it's an outright recession, it's really too soon to tell.
And when do you think it'll start to turn around?
Well, my guess is that by early to mid-2002, things would improve substantially. The pace of that will depend on the maintenance of business and household confidence, which is why the president led with his package.
And he says the answer is tax cuts, but the bipartisan leadership of the House and Senate Budget Committee says that any tax cuts have to be temporary. The president's business tax cuts are permanent.
Well, I wouldn't put it quite that way. I think what the leadership is saying is that we want a tax package that doesn't have very long-term adverse consequences for the budget. That could include some things that look like permanent changes. For example, accelerating the rate cuts is just simply moving forward something that was to have happened anyway. The expensing plan the president mentioned would also have very small out-year costs.
Well, but won't you get more bang for the buck on that business expensing? If the businesses know they have one shot at it, they have to do it now.
Wrong. The one thing we know in economics about very temporary investment incentives is that in Washington, we have very poor ability to fine-tune and micromanage the economy. A permanent investment incentive would be the best way to go, or at least one that's of several years' duration.
But former Treasury Secretary Bob Rubin says that any kind of permanent business tax cuts and the eliminating the alternative minimum tax would be a permanent corporate tax cut, runs the risk of driving up interest rates in the long term, which should cancel out or could cancel out any fiscal stimulus.
Well, I don't agree for two reasons. The first thing is, again, remember with the business investment incentive, you're simply pulling forward capital recovery charges, so there really isn't much of a long-term effect. Based on our own internal analysis, we feel that most of the package that's being proposed, the part that would be long-lasting, would have minimal effects on long-term interest rates.
The Democrats have also opposed accelerating the personal income tax cuts, moving it up to this year, because they say the bulk of it is going to go to the higher income people who won't be the most likely to spend that money.
Well, I think, again, that's incorrect. The way to think about this package is as a confidence-building package and a growth insurance package. The business investment incentives are really about job creation and helping the manufacturing sector and American industry. Accelerating the rate cuts is also about confidence. And as the president said, there would also be a package for low and moderate income households.
So does he intend to include in that package a rebate for the people who pay the Social Security payroll taxes but don't pay income taxes? They were left out of the first rebate this year.
Well, this is something that will have to be worked out with the Congress. The president has said he's very flexible in working with the Congress, and Secretary O'Neill will be leading that effort. But the president does feel very strongly that low and moderate income households should be included in this package.
And that means a payroll tax rebate?
It could, but again, there are many ways to address low and moderate income households.
One of the things he left out, noticeably to House Republicans, was a capital gains tax cut. Did the president leave that out because he thinks it's a bad idea now, because it'll cause people to sell stocks in a shaky economy, or because he wants to limit his fights with the Democrats?
Well, not really on either count. I think the reason for thinking about moving the capital gains tax cut aside is, one, it's very good policy to cut capital gains taxes permanently, but it's probably...
Even in a shaky economy?
Even in a shaky economy, as long as it's a permanent tax cut. But that's really part of a tax reform discussion. The president really had two things in mind. One was, what's the package that best improves confidence? And second, what could be done quickly? Because that's going to be effective.
Democrats say the most effective thing quickly in the short term is to extend unemployment and health care benefits. The president had about an $8 billion package. Democrats say they need about $12 billion. Is he willing to be flexible on that?
Well, I think the president led early on with national emergency grants as an enhanced flexibility and extending unemployment insurance benefits. I think the administration believes we've done the best possible package there.
You say you expect a recovery next year, but is there any way for you to take into account in your models the near certainty of a military attack, and according to the intelligence committees, the near certainty of a retaliation on U.S. soil? How can you factor in that when the problem is really psychology and fear, not economics?
One way to do it is to think about a range of forecasts. When I said that the economy was likely to recover by early to mid next year, that's pretty much the consensus of the private sector. In the White House, we've been looking at a range of forecasts that suggest some downside risks. And frankly, that's one reason the president is pushing for a growth insurance package to make sure that the recovery is likely in 2002.
Mr. Hubbard, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
When we come back, the Roundtable with Claire Shipman and George Will. Stay with us.
Time now for our roundtable. Opinion here. Take it for whatever you think it's worth. And joining us as always, George Will. Hello, George.
Hello, Sam.
And ABC's Claire Shipman. Claire, nice to see you.
Thank you, Sam. Nice to be here.
Well, if military action is imminent of some sort, what's the objective? Where are we going with this, Claire?
Well, I think short term, if military action is imminent, what they're looking to do is get in there, take out as much of the anti-aircraft batteries as they can. It's not Iraq, but they do have a substantial amount, and that's something they're looking to do. And do it as surgically as possible, because what's going to be critical in the early phases of this operation is this delicate balancing act between providing as much humanitarian relief as they can and looking as humane as they can and limiting the civilian casualties and accomplishing what they need to accomplish on the ground to be able to get the special forces in there. Otherwise, they're going to roil the Arab world.
George, if we start military action, does that mean it's a sustained campaign, or will it have a strike and then maybe a pause of some sort?
I don't know that. I think Claire speaks to the very short term, but I think in the not very long run, the aim is to collapse the Taliban regime. Go back to the old metaphor of needles and haystacks. Hunting him in the mountain valleys of Afghanistan in the winter is a terrible task. Collapse the regime, keep him on the run, make it hard for him to plan.
But we've not been very good at finding needles in haystacks either. In fact, even needles that were the haystack. We haven't had a good time finding haystacks. I mean, when it got to the embarrassing business of trying to flush out Noriega with rock and roll music, as you recall. So I think that we've got to be very careful about getting Osama bin Laden as an objective. But we've done it. You heard the senator saying it.
I think that's a problem. I think we have to get this needle now. Long term, I think we're in a box. If we don't get Osama bin Laden, I don't think anybody's going to think it's a victory.
But I also think we need to do a little bit more of a propaganda campaign here. Now, I understand that we're sending leaflets down with the food and all that, but I mean in the wider world. There's yet another Why Do They Hate Us article in one of the magazines this week. And the truth is, you look at our most recent military actions, they were to help Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo. What was our most recent economic bailout? Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country on earth. That's right, not to mention sending our troops in to defend Kuwait. And we don't do enough of that discussion. We seem to sort of hold back.
Well, George, let me come back to Osama bin Laden. Let us assume we do, in fact, have his head on a platter, as the vice president put it the other day. Do you think Americans will say, hooray, we did it, we have our revenge or justice, we've won, and then lose heart for a sustained campaign against other terrorist networks?
I don't think they'll say that, but if they do, his replacement will disabuse us. It will be like getting a drug kingpin from the Colombian cartels. We've got kingpins before, and the flow of drugs comes in, and the price goes down, and the purity goes up, and the war goes on.
So let me turn it around, Claire. If we don't immediately, or even in months, find Osama bin Laden, but in fact roll up other terrorist networks, replace the Taliban, will Americans be satisfied with that?
I think a lot's going to depend on the response we see here in terms of terrorist retaliation. And that's something the White House is trying to figure out how to prepare the American public for. As they urge us to get back to our normal lives, they're trying to explain to Americans that you may be living with some risk for some time to come.
There's such mixed messages, because on the one hand, I mean, you've just heard Senator Shelby and Graham say it's going to happen. There's going to be some further attack. There's going to be retaliation. But then you have Secretary Thompson saying we're fully prepared for any kind of biological attack. And
the president says get back to your life and hug your children and go to the ball game and go to Disney World.
Well, I think you can do those things under any circumstances, but I think that the idea of not being on the alert is foolish.
The message is mixed, and both halves of the message are true. Look, the United States has been living with terrorism inflicted from abroad for 27 days. Israel has for 53 years and has a vigorous society and a dynamic economy. The British have been living for decades with Irish terrorism, and life goes on.
Speaking of Israel, there was an interesting and really remarkable exchange between the two governments this week, as you know. In trying to put together a so-called moderate Arab nation coalition, the Prime Minister of Israel became very worried about that, and Prime Minister Sharon said something which drew a very sharp, I think the word rebuke might be the correct word, from the White House. Here is what the Prime Minister said, and then Ari Fleischer, the President's spokesman, followed.
Do not try to appease the Arabs on our expense. This is unacceptable to us. Israel will not be Czechoslovakia.
The president believes that these remarks are unacceptable.
Well, the Prime Minister of Israel said that he was worried about appeasement on the part of the United States by putting together this coalition, and he warned, as you heard, that Israel did not intend to be Czechoslovakia given away to Hitler during that period. And the President of the United States spokesman said in his name that was unacceptable. George?
It was unacceptable. It was too strong. However, let's look at what caused this. The United States is not seizing the assets of Hamas and Hezbollah. The President has said, falsely by the way, that a Palestinian state has always been part of the American vision for the Middle East.
But he said it.
He said it, but the fact is, Israel is getting worried that we're communicating the message that if you strike New York, we're going to round on you and pressure Jerusalem.
Well, but you know, the trouble is that the statements by Sharon are putting Israel at risk in terms of American public opinion. I think that the war hawks here in this country who have been ginning up that kind of statement are doing a huge disservice to Israel, because the truth is you get another attack in this country, especially if it's of major proportions as it was against the World Trade Center, and you start to hear Americans saying, oh, we better not support Israel the way we've been supporting Israel if this is going to be that kind of response.
I think part of the problem is that this administration also had put a hold on the peace process, essentially viewing it as too Clintonian, and suddenly to be putting pressure day after day on Israel, these phone calls by Colin Powell, it's not easy, and a lot of officials behind the scenes are saying we could have probably handled this more deftly with Israel. There could have been a little more hand-holding.
They dusted off the Mitchell report. Now, the Mitchell report says what we need in the Middle East are confidence-building measures.
Right.
The premise of that absurdity is that the Palestinian-Israeli dispute is a huge misunderstanding.
Well, but the politics of this internally are such in both countries that Ariel Sharon needs to be a lot more careful.
13 days after this crisis started, I'm in a cab in Washington, and the driver has the radio on. It's on an African-American radio station, in which a very smooth and articulate man is enunciating the following proposition. He says, what agency in the world is cunning, long-headed, and ruthless enough to bring off these attacks? The Mossad.
Right.
Well,
blamed Israel.
I think most people think that's nonsense, George.
Well,
but I think the point the point that you made is correct. I noticed in the United States, 50 prominent Jewish Americans have signed a letter to the president supporting the president's policy of trying to build a coalition with moderate Arab nations, suggesting that in this country, Jewish Americans are conflicted about this dispute.
Now that coalition, though, Sam, could have its own interesting prices, because here we are, we've seen Secretary Rumsfeld going around the world talking to all of these countries, and you know, there's some F-16s going here and some sanctions being lifted there and all kinds of
That's right.
promises.
Let's move to something very interesting. When it comes to bipartisanship, we saw it this week. Former President Clinton and Bob Dole, who ran against each other in 1996, made a commercial together for humanitarian aid. Let's look at it.
In the wake of the terrorist attacks, America has truly come together.
Prayer services, blood drives, children collecting pennies. Americans responded with a spirit that underscores what's best about our country.
But we can do more. To help those families devastated September 11th, we should make certain a college education is available to each and every one of their children.
We can do that with your help. Call today and donate to the Families of Freedom Scholarship Fund. Helping these families will show just how much we care.
Claire, what's the background of that?
Well, this is the first time we've seen this ad, and it's interesting because the president's advisors, the former president's advisors, were looking for a role for him to play that was more than just hugging people on the street, for a man who clearly wants to be in the middle of all of this. And I think this seemed substantial, and also standing next to Bob Dole seemed to give him a steady platform where he couldn't be accused of being too partisan.
Well, that's bipartisanship, certainly. But on Capitol Hill, when the president proposes $75 billion of stimulus, we already see in both parties people fighting over where that stimulus should go, George.
Well, we have two parties for a reason. They have different ideas about the utility of government, and one has a more state-centered, government-centered approach than the other. But both parties are groping, because this is economic policy as psychotherapy. All of this depends on getting the American people cheerful and spending again. And it's not, we don't know how to do that.
Well, interestingly enough, I know that Nicholas Brady, who was the first Bush Secretary of the Treasury, a conservative Republican, says let's stop the payroll taxes for 3 months as an immediate shot into the consumer.
Well, and you heard Glenn Hubbard saying that's on the table. I think that's likely to happen. But what's so interesting is the administration was basically ready to cave to the Democrats on a bunch of these things, on airport security, federalizing the security officers, on a lot of the stuff in the stimulus package. And they took it back to the Republican caucus, and people just went nuts. Now, the Democrats were going nuts, too, so they were grateful that the Republicans went nuts first. But as one Democrat said to me, it turned it over to the clerks.
They were grateful the Republicans went nuts first?
Because they looked more partisan.
Exactly. I think what's so interesting is that since September 11th, there's been this intense relationship, this courtship between Tom Daschle especially and George W. Bush, and it was really getting on the nerves of a lot of Republicans who were worried that suddenly...
a lot of Democrats.
And Democrats. That suddenly the president was turning into a Democrat who knew what to expect anymore, and I think what we saw at the end of the week is...
And the Democrats were saying, we want to get our issues out there.
Exactly.
Well, some of the Republicans who wanted to have no federal takeover, complete takeover of airport security, the screeners and all of that, were saying that to the White House, and someone said to them, oh, in other words, you want the president to veto an airport security bill on this grounds.
But the truth is it has not been worked out.
That's right.
They are objecting to that, and the bill is got its problems.
And everybody's going to have to be pretty deft about how they handle all of this now that we're back into a little partisanship, because the public appetite for that isn't clear.
What do you think about Jim Baker's idea, former Secretary of State and Secretary of the Treasury, that until people feel more secure, the danger from other attacks, no matter how much you cut in monetary, the interest rate, or put in stimulus, they're not going to spend money?
We don't know, because, Sam, 40% of all the American people who are old enough to trade stocks have never known a serious bear market. Now, in a country that is neurologically wired to the stock market, a country in which talk about stocks and bonds is as ubiquitous as talk about sports, ESPN for the sports fans, CNBC for the stock market fans. We don't know. This is new territory because of the changed demographics of stock ownership.
Speaking of sports, big week for baseball, George. Tell us about it.
Well, two happy, cheerful American icons, the Orioles, Cal Ripken, and the Padres, Tony Gwynn, are calling it quits after great careers, and a lot of sentiment about that. And Barry Bonds, who is less so of an icon, has set a stupendous record of 72 home runs. Now, Barry Bonds is, let's face it, like anchovies on your salad, an acquired taste. I happen to have acquired him, but he's not cuddly.
Where does this end? It's like the 4-minute mile. Well, if that's a happy event one way or the other, it's a sad event this week, Cokie, that Mike Mansfield, former Senate Majority Leader, died at the age of 98.
Age of 98, and a remarkable man in so many ways. We were just talking about bipartisanship, and he really was someone who just couldn't deal with the partisanship of the Senate of his era, and the Democrats would get furious with him when he was the Majority Leader, saying, you know, you've got to be more partisan. He wouldn't do it. He served under Democratic and Republican presidents. He also came in when Jeanette Rankin, the only person to vote against World War II, was defeated. She also voted against World War I, and he represented a state that understands dissent.
George?
He lied creatively once in his life at age 14. He lied to get into the Navy.
For World War I.
He was notoriously terse. I remember on one of our Sunday morning talk shows during the energy crisis 25 years ago, a man asked a particularly recondite, long-winded, serpentine question, and at the end of it, he asked it of Mansfield. He needed time to get his wind. Mansfield's answer was, perhaps. When the questioner was so out of breath he could barely continue.
Mike said that his greatest regret was that he was not able to slow down or end the Vietnam War, which he once called grotesque. I think that's a pretty good judgment that history will make, at least for this man, and we're going to miss him. Thank you all, and when we come back, the George Will commentary. Please stay with us.
The United States has to make some decision this week, George.
They have to make it tomorrow, Cokie. Tomorrow, the General Assembly is going to vote Syria on as a non-permanent member of the Security Council at the UN. That's a done deal, can't be stopped. The question is not whether the United States will vote for that, that's unthinkable, but whether we will merely abstain or cast a resounding no vote. Asked about this week, a State Department spokesman said the following.
I think I have to stick on that one to our general proposition that we don't announce those votes.
Well, that's all very well, but the State Department has announced most emphatically that Syria is one of 7 nations who engage in state-sponsored terrorism. It's on a list with Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea, Cuba, and Sudan. The State Department says Syria provides safe haven and support for terrorists. That means Syria is the enemy. That is national policy, stated again last week clearly by President Bush in the following statement.
I will enforce the doctrine that says that if you house a terrorist, you're just as guilty as the terrorists themselves.
Just as guilty. Now that means Syria is not just an imperfect member of the Security Council, it is unfit. The question is, will the United States say so with a resounding no vote? If not, there is a danger the American message is going to be garbled. Moral clarity is a weapon in war. We don't want to throw that weapon away. Koki?
Thank you, George. It's a difficult time. Sam and I will be back after this. Well, Sam, as we reported at the beginning of the broadcast, bombing and food drops are expected shortly in Afghanistan. In fact, the opposition to the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, is saying they expect the bombings within hours.
Well, if the bombing starts, of course, we at ABC will bring you every detail. We'll be on a special report. But, of course, a first shot is not going to be a last shot. And I think the question is one of staying power. The president has sort of said to us, this will be a long war. There will be many special reports over many months.
And you will be having something on your sam.com on
yes,
this
indeed.
subject.
While all of this may take place on the ground eventually, satellites play a role. To find Osama bin Laden, satellites can help. And you can find out how by logging on to sam.abcnews.com. We have an expert who can help us with that. And so, until next week, that's This Week. Thank you.